Hello everyone, and welcome to tonight's global webcast to review popular diets with your speaker Laura LaValle. She is the Director of Nutrition and Dietetics at Progressive Medical Center of Orange County, California. Laura is also the Vice President of Nutrition and Dietetics Programs at Metabolic Code Enterprises, Inc. She has a Bachelor's of Science degree in Nutrition and Dietetics from the University of Akron and is a licensed and registered dietitian with over 20 years of experience, including hospital-based and integrative settings. Laura has helped develop a line of low-glycemic, gluten-free frozen meals for Artisan Bistro Pro Direct and helped train Lifetime Fitness dietitians on the usage of Metabolic Code as a comprehensive weight management tool for clients. Laura's education and work experience focus on her commitment to two primary goals. One, helping people have the knowledge and tools to see the difference that good nutrition can make in their lives, and two, furthering healthcare in the United States toward a system that better utilizes proven dietary supplements for health and wellness and better management of health conditions. She is extremely knowledgeable on all things dietetics, and I know you will enjoy her presentation tonight. Without further delay, here's Laura LaValle to review popular diets. Go ahead, Laura.
Thank you very much, Libby, and welcome to everyone out there and listening in on the webcast tonight. I think you're going to enjoy the presentation. This is one of my favorite topics, is kind of going over all different diets and you know, what may be really of value with some diets, and other things that you have to know what the potential problems can be with different diets. So let's just dig right in and have some fun. I wanted to let you know that, you know, basically I'm talking about popular diets, not medically accepted diets, so things that just kind of float around. Right now we have some crossover going on because vegetarian diets are becoming more medically accepted and recommended, and on the other token we have things like a ketogenic diet that were used really only medically that are now becoming a popular diet. So what's popular, what's medical? We'll discuss what the diet is and what health issues it may address, what it won't help, and therefore problems you might encounter. For those of you that were with us on the last webinar, I would like us to try to keep in mind some of these parameters that we have at the Metabolic Code Diet, LaValle world. And these are things like addressing other issues besides just weight management and heart health, but looking at total health in terms of gut health especially is a huge issue that we always keep in mind. So whether a diet includes the common allergens and what to consider there, and things like, you know, the organic quality. I really didn't harp on that throughout the slides every time, but I wanted to mention it here at the beginning. With any of these diets, many of them will have organic versions, but many of them won't, and so it's just not necessarily something that may be emphasized, but that we have as a core value in our company because we feel it's important to the greatest extent possible that people can eat organic foods and lower their toxic burden on their body. So that's just something I wanted to remember to mention at the beginning because I don't have it within all the slides. But you know, you have to look at what are your desired endpoints for the diet. Is it just weight control? No, we always want to think of weight control as well as, you know, preventing disease and improving disease state management to the greatest extent possible. We want our diets to be anti-inflammatory as much as possible. we want to make sure that we safeguard a person's immune health, and so there are some slides on some of the diets that address that, and just support optimal health, obviously. So I actually hadn't planned originally on covering calorie control diets, and then we had this big news flash a couple of days ago. I don't know if any of you saw it, but it was on every newscast out here, it seemed like, where the big study came out and said the best diets are Jenny Craig and Nutrisystem and Weight Watchers. So I thought, you know what, just to be timely with headlines that are going on today, let's just talk a little bit about calorie control diets. And another reason I want to talk about them is because within the Lifestyle Guidance portal there are several, just basic calorie control diets available. And so I just wanted to discuss, would these be diets that you should or could use, and what are pros and cons to calorie control diets? So energy restricted calorie control diets. Basically, for the most part, these diets are diets that restrict calories, but within that calorie restriction, we need the last slide. There's 50 to 60% of the calories that will come from carbohydrate typically. That's just the way these diets are typically put together, which means that they contain about 20% protein, and depending on exactly how much carb, then they'll have 20 to 30% fat. So I'm going to discuss calorie controlled diets. Vegetarian diets aren't necessarily calorie controlled, but I included them in this first calorie controlled section, believe it or not, because when you really dig into the literature on vegetarian diets, you'll find that one of the hypothesized mechanisms of why they work is because with not eating animal proteins, which are high in protein and often high in fat, they can be higher calorie for the amount that you're actually eating, and they put it out as a possible mechanism that by cutting out meat, you're cutting out a calorie-dense food, and therefore, some of the benefits of vegetarian diet could be from somewhat lower calorie intake. In the real world, I don't find vegetarian diets to necessarily always be very much lower in calorie intake than an average diet. Mediterranean diets I also included in this calorie control section because as part of the recommendations, one of the central recommendations is to eat modest portions. So it's semi in the calorie control, but we'll just be talking about it after we go through the other ones. And then I want to talk a little bit about very low calorie diets. So this is the study that just came out, the efficacy of commercial weight loss programs, and it looked at quite a number of them. And the ones that emerged as most effective, as we mentioned before, as I mentioned, was Weight Watchers, Jenny Craig, Nutrisystems. And they evaluated e-diets and all kinds of them. Well, one of the things you have to remember when you're trying to decide, can I do just a calorie control approach on a client, is that there aren't any restrictions typically on any foods. One of the reasons people that I hear, clients or just people you come across, say why they like Weight Watchers, for example, is because they don't have to cut out anything. They can eat anything they want. They just have to eat it in smaller amounts. And some people get real worried when they think they might not be able to eat cookies, for example, or chips or something like that. So, they just look at it as a little bit easier to do. But let's just look at the efficacy numbers. I was actually shocked when I looked at the data on this study and found out that Jenny Craig was noted as being the most effective. And so how effective was it? Okay, what they compared Jenny Craig diet to in all these diets is they compared them to groups of people that just got diet education and diet counseling, and not a lot of real specifics. So you can imagine how hard it is to sit and educate people in a group and say, in general, in diet, here's what you should do to be effective for weight loss. You know, watch your calories. Who knows what all they educate them on. But they're just given the idea of here's what you need to do with your diet versus a specific diet program like Jenny Craig. And even with that small amount of guidance in diet education and counseling programs, these organized diets were all under 5% more effective. To me, even though they're saying these are the ones that work the best, that's really a dismal success rate in my opinion. JC, there's for Jenny Craig, 4.9% more weight loss at 12 months compared to the diet and education counseling group. Nutrisystem was 3.8% more effective, and Weight Watchers was 2.6% more effective. So that's really not very good. But they gave Weight Watchers extra points for the fact that as they track their data out to 12 months and 2 years, they had the best, people, the highest number of people that managed to keep the weight off. So they get some points for that, and I think that it has to just do with they have strong connection with their clients coming back at regular intervals. So I want you to remember that as a pearl for as you choose to implement different diets and your practices, making sure that you keep touching base with those patients on a schedule is important to weight loss success, and especially over time. So, the thing I want to say about calorie-controlled diets, and I touched on this somewhat in my last webinar, but it's not that people can't lose weight on these diets. As long as they adhere to the calorie level and all this, most people will lose weight, and there's pretty strong evidence that calorie-controlled diets are effective for weight loss. And if you add in exercise along with it, better yet, it provides greater long-term weight loss in diet alone, and that's a big lesson that came out of the National Weight Control Registry. People that manage to keep their weight off really have a strong commitment to exercise, so that's important. But when it comes to calorie-controlled diets, the problem is not the initial weight loss, losing weight. The problem is definitely keeping it off. And we theorize that one of the big reasons why the long-term success of calorie control diets is so poor is because it is a well-known fact that with anytime anybody does some energy restriction, they're going to lose up to a quarter of the weight that they lose can be from lean mass, not just muscle, but also bone. In fact, one of the last dietetics conferences I went to, the bone issue was of great concern. They were bringing out and mentioning that they're seeing more and more fracture incidents of different types of fractures, even in people now who are still very overweight, which is a new thing, because it used to be, as long as you were bearing weight, your bones would tend to stay dense. But now people don't have as dense of bones apparently, so when we go on an energy restricted diet and we lose weight and then we lose more bone, there's a pretty high risk for fractures. So, this is another reason why it's so important to make sure that we're trying to encourage our clients to get an exercise habit so we can slow that loss of muscle, but it also impacts bone and helps keep that bone density on. So it's got to be weight-bearing exercise. And one of the ways that we can help ameliorate this is to up the protein intake a little bit. It does reduce the loss of lean mass by as much as a third. So I just want to point out, one of the big cautions with calorie control diets is from this next slide. this is a study that was done that compared the Zone diet to the American Heart Association Step 1 diet, which is a 60% carb, and look at that protein, only 15% protein, 25% fat. It was a sort of small study group, but they had them on their respective diets for 6 weeks. And of course the Zone is a 40% carb and higher protein, maybe 20-25%, and higher fat. Well, the Zone group lost the most weight by far and 0.5% of body fat. So a good portion of the weight was from fat, is the point. But look at that American Heart Association group, which lost over 2.5 pounds, but no body fat. So I include this slide because the question is, if they didn't lose body fat, what did they lose? They lost lean mass. And this is the point. The American Heart Association Step 1 diet is a calorie-controlled, higher carb, lower protein diet. And wow, do people lose lean mass on that diet. So when you look at the use of calorie control, I know that it's very tempting for people because they don't want to give up any foods and they don't care if they have to eat smaller amounts as long as they can have some. But, you know, allowing these higher sugar and higher carb foods, the treats that people want with lower protein, for one, is a huge recipe for increased appetite. And this is coming out in studies now as well. When we eat higher carb and we don't eat protein and things to balance it, like the breakfast study that I talked about in the last webinar, we end up with a spike in blood sugar and then a drop. And when we have the drop, people get hungry. So this is another potential problem with the calorie-controlled diets is, you know, you're not allowed to eat very much, but you're eating foods that can stimulate appetite by being that higher carb and not balanced by enough protein. So really, you know, when to use low-calorie diets, to be honest, I'm just not a fan because that higher carb is a problem in many ways, and the fact that it's usually not balanced by enough protein is the biggest issue. So the only time I would feel comfortable is, you know, once in a while you have a client that is not only overweight, but they have a lot of muscle. They're that stocky, you know, high muscle statured person, and you feel that they can stand to lose some muscle along with their fat. That's really the best application in terms of clinical need. The other thing is when you're eating that much carbohydrate on these diets, that even though it's calorie controlled for many people, they just won't lose weight. And in particular, it's your people that you know that are solidly in that insulin resistant milieu of health issues. They often will not have good results with this diet. But once in a while you'll have a client that just doesn't want to give anything up. They need to lose weight, you know, and they're going to be insistent. And so, you know, we've got calorie control diets in the lifestyle guidance portal available for use, but I'm really just not a big fan, and those are my reasons why. So let's move on and talk about very low calorie diets. I sort of decided to put this in here again because these are diets that were reviewed in that recent study on efficacy of commercial weight loss programs. And they're still out there, they're still around, and you know, you may have people considering using them. They are much more effective for weight loss. Again, they compared these to the education and counseling approach, and there's, I guess, I hadn't really known about this one, but the Health Management Resources Program that is out there had the high out of the very low calorie medically supervised diets. Medifast only had 5.6% weight loss compared to the HMR one that had 13.6, and OptiFast had 7%. Well, regardless, these numbers are way higher than the other diets, so they are more effective in the short term. The problem is the attrition rates on these are very, very high. People drop out left and right, just hard to stick to. You do have greater health risks with these diets. Gallstones in particular are a big risk of these diets. So you just have to make sure that if someone wants to try one of these, they're definitely medically supervised. But a study that came out, in 2011, brought up a problem that occurs with very low-calorie diets, and it's that they cause changes in your hunger hormones. So your ghrelin, the hormone that makes your stomach growl and makes you feel hungry, goes up, and a hunger-suppressing hormone, peptide YY, and leptin go down. They decrease. So you're making the very change in hunger hormones that you don't want. It's similar to what happens when people don't get enough sleep. And so on very low-calorie diets, you may get weight loss while you're on the diet, but it can really cause this rebound effect that your hunger hormones will really get jacked up, and they don't even get back to normal, to what they were prior to going on the diet, even after a year. So there was a big warning that came with the study that was basically to say, be very, very careful. And in fact, I would have expected a stronger, we in the medical community maybe should just consider giving these programs up. The risks are kind of high. So I don't use them. It begs the question of what happens on Hcg diets, and that's kind of another topic I want to do all on its own and a webinar of its own. But, supposedly with the use of the Hcg itself, you're tricking the body into not realizing that it's eating such low calories, and you won't have this same hunger response. And in truth, in using the Hcg diet, because we have used it, and for a while we were using it quite a bit, we have some clients who do experience, while they're on the Hcg, decreased hunger. Others that have greatly increased hunger. So it just is, I don't know why I haven't figured out why it's not consistent, except that I have noticed that it tended to work well for my clients that did tend to have a lot of food cravings. So for what it's worth, we haven't got any specific study on Hcg and if you get the same effects on increased hunger. In general, I would say it's held down compared to a regular, very low-calorie diet. That's just from my experience. So very low-calorie diets, just a big caution. Try not to use them if you don't have to. Vegetarian diets. Let's launch into these. I really wanted to talk about vegetarian diets because it's a huge emphasis in healthcare right now, and that is getting people to understand about eating. They're starting to use the term plant-based diet, so we'll talk about that in a moment. But with a vegetarian diet, I think we all know what it is. It's when you eat all, vegetables, greens, fruits, nuts, seeds, beans, whole grains, and the fat is a point where different versions of the diet will be different. There are very low-fat versions out there, and then most people, I would say, an average vegetarian that I know, they still use some fats and oils of different types. Coconut oil has become popular, butter, ghee, a variety of things, and some will try to use it in moderation, and some just figure that as long as it's a healthy version of a fat or oil, they'll just use it ad lib, you know. But this, the big advocates for vegetarian diets is this Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, and Neil Barnard is the head of it, and he's quite a huge advocate, and as a researcher has done a lot of research on vegetarian diets. And as they look at literature, they're thinking that they're finding that vegetarian diets do lower risks for cardiovascular disease, certain types of cancer may be lower risk, and definitely healthier. They're seeing trends towards better blood pressure, you know, healthier body weight. So these are things that are coming out of the way they're reviewing the literature on this. I want to just discuss plant-based because really they're synonymous. A plant-based diet is a vegetarian diet. However, what they're doing is they're trying to soften the message somewhat by saying that it doesn't have to be 100% animal protein free. So now they've got a term that's called Flexitarian, so it's somebody who eats vegetarian most of the time but will eat meat on occasion. Or if they just want to eat fish on occasion, it's called a pescatarian. And the only thing I will say to you is if someone says that they're vegetarian, you should ask a few questions and say, oh, okay, great. So what do you eat, you know, and what do you not eat? And a lot of times it's surprising to me how many people just simply mean they're not eating red meat. And that is not vegetarian, but that's people's understanding sometimes. So, but for those that really understand and really are, it's becoming more popular and more people are wanting to try vegetarian diets. So I just want to point out some of the cautions. A vegetarian diet is wonderful in that, you know, you want people to learn how to eat a lot of plant foods. That's healthy. But they are in the high carb category. There's just no way to get around it when the basis of your diet is all carbohydrate category foods, including, you know, the fruits, the whole grains, the beans. It's a very, for the volume that you need to eat, it becomes a very high carbohydrate diet. And it was interesting to me, this Frank, who is a big nutrition researcher out of Harvard, and he actually did a study and said, you know, even in Asian countries where they do eat less animal protein, the rates of diabetes are pretty high and going up, of course, as you see more Western influence in the diet. But he was calling for a caution to say that if you're going to do a vegetarian diet, please be very careful. Don't overeat calories, and by all means, try to make it a glycemic controlled version of a vegetarian diet. So that's one caution. You know, if people have a really good, even when you have a really good vegetarian diet, it's hard to avoid deficiencies of certain nutrients. In particular, the ones that come up in studies are still not getting quite enough omega-3, and part of that is because even if you eat flaxseed or use flaxseed oil, that is not a readily available version of omega-3. It requires a conversion step. And one of the things that's rate limiting on that conversion step is high glycemic intake. So you've put together a combination of events there that can lead to not getting quite enough omega-3. So being aware of that. But the big ones that I do still see in vegetarian, and it doesn't happen overnight because your B12 does store somewhat. Better than most B vitamins. It takes a while to deplete, but I do see B12 anemias in vegetarians. People that have been vegetarian for a while, it's an issue. I really feel that zinc is an issue too, and because that is an important immune nutrient, and I have a slide and a couple of slides up that shows the immune effects of vegetarian diet. So my personal theory is that part of that issue with that is the lack of zinc. Your best sources of zinc are animal protein sources. So in vegans and looking for nutrient deficiencies, they have all of those issues as well, the lower protein intake, omega-3, retinol, B12, and zinc, but they also are much lower in B12 and lower in calcium. So with a a vegetarian, a lot of people that cut out animal proteins like fish and chicken and turkey and beef, they will still eat some eggs or some dairy, and so that helps out the calcium intake somewhat. Interestingly, when B12 is down, homocysteine goes up, and there are studies that show that vegetarians do have higher homocysteine levels, consistently higher than when people include meat in their diet. This one study I cited here, because it's often, everybody thinks if they eat vegetarian that they'll avoid cancer, and here again, it's just something that if you keep your eyes and ears open, just every so often I'll hear in conversation with people, as you go through your life, and they'll say, oh, I was so surprised that such and so got cancer because she's so healthy, or he's so healthy. He eats vegetarian and he's a runner, and and they just think that it's a magic bullet for protection, and in real life, I honestly don't see it. That just because you're vegetarian you can't get cancer. So the studies are kind of all over the map on that, really. There are some that show modest protection and others that show no difference, and certain cancer types that are a vegetarian diet is more protective of than others. So that's the bottom line on that. Your vegetarian diets, definitely when they look at health risks that seem to be pretty lowered, the cardiovascular disease risk is coming up fairly consistently. In this particular review of it, they looked at meat eaters compared to vegetarians and found anywhere from 3 to 20% lower body weights in vegetarians. One of the things that they don't bring up on this, and they never look at, is a comparison of body fat or lean muscle mass. I would love to see somebody take this up as their research topic, and in fact I've often said if I go for a PhD, I'd love to do a study on this. I really feel, and you can just look at the people, sort of big icons of vegetarian diets like Bill Clinton and Joel Fuhrman and Neil Barnard themselves. So they're very, very thin, no fat, and not a lot of muscle either. But I've got to keep us moving along here. So one of the things I just want to put out as a caution on vegetarian diet is that when they look in eating patterns of people, they go to large health studies like the Nurses' Health Study. And it was interesting to me that when they're saying they're comparing vegetarians to people who eat meat, it actually is not just the meat consumption that they're looking at. It is actually a Western diet that they're comparing the vegetarian diet to, which is not just high in red and processed meats. It's very high in sweets, desserts, French fries, and white flour, basically, refined grains. So they try to adjust for those other factors and say, well, when we take out the risk that would be from sweets and desserts and refined grains and fried foods, how much is left? How much of it is still left when we get all those other things out? And they say that consumption of meat just raises risks flat out. I honestly question how accurate they can be with just ruling out these other factors. So that's my 2 cents on it. The next slide, I just want you to understand, I don't have time to review all these in detail, but the bottom line is there is significant evidence that there is reduced activity of phagocytosis, suppressed T lymphocyte response in in vegetarians, and they have significantly lower white and red blood cell counts. So you really just need to be aware of this. The next slide points out about meat eating. You know, when you read about vegetarian diets, people want to say that people who eat a lot of meat are very acidic and they're going to lose their bone. But actually, there's considerable evidence that eating animal protein helps protect bone, especially in elderly, and that vegan diets in particular are associated with lower bone mineral density. So all the talk about that is not supported by the literature fully. So, you know, what would you, would you ever want to just recommend a vegetarian diet? In our book, we want people to eat a lot of plant foods, but we don't want them to exclude animal protein for a variety of reasons. So we tend not to be big advocates. One of the things we see in clinical practice is that we constantly see yeast issues in people who have been vegetarian for a period of time. And the other thing is I encourage people to watch for immune depressive effects, because you'll have people that over time will start to become more susceptible to colds and flu, and they'll mistake that to mean that they're detoxing from their vegetarian diet and they're getting healthier. So if people are insisting on a vegetarian or vegan diet, I encourage them to watch that they don't start noticing that they get sick more easily. One of the things on vegetarian diets, I don't know if if you've ever tried a vegetarian diet, but it's really hard to comply. I was vegetarian years ago, and one of the things that I didn't like about the diet is that I was hungry all day long, and I just felt like I had to keep eating and eating. And this makes people tend to turn toward high grain and starchy foods to feel more full, which then kind of defeats the purpose on the glycemic issues. So again, if you have people that can afford to lose muscle, vegetarian diet might be okay. And in fact, I've used vegetarian diets specifically for clients that are that stocky body type, that they have a lot of fat, they're overweight, but they also have a lot of muscle, and you just big stocky muscles, and when you put them on a low-carb, high-protein diet, sometimes that's too much. They gain more muscle and they don't need it. So sometimes I'll use a vegetarian diet for a while to help get some of that muscle off, to be honest. Okay, we've got to go fast. Raw diet, I just want to mention that it's basically typically a vegetarian, although sometimes people on raw diet will include raw meats and fish. I really don't see that very often. The theory behind the raw diet is that when you cook foods, you denature the enzymes, and those enzymes, they say, help the food break down and help digestion. So it's a very high plant food-based diet as well. You'll see on all raw food diets that it tends to be a lot of foods will be blenderized first and used in different recipes, and that's actually a good thing, and I'll say why in a moment. Typically people won't eat dairy, but once in a while you'll see raw foodists that will go ahead and eat cheese if it's made from raw milk. There are some studies coming out on it. I've cited on the next slide, decreased blood pressure. There was one study done on fibromyalgia patients that said that there was significant improvement. I do want to point out that in that study, out of 30 subjects, it was 19 of the subjects who were considered responsive to the diet and had improvements in fibromyalgia pain. If you go in forums online, you'll see people talking about this, and they'll say, well, I did raw diet and it didn't do anything for my fibro, or I had to cut out gluten and that's when I got better. But the point is just there are a few studies on it. But in real life, the truth is that humans just don't have good mastication for plant cell walls. Our teeth don't break it down very well. We're lacking a lot of the enzymes to break down plant materials. And so we really just don't have the digestive capacity for plant cell walls and fibers is basically what it comes down to. And in fact, when you cook foods, you'll open up some of those plant cell walls, and certain nutrients are actually more available with cooking. That's like the lycopene in tomatoes. So I don't think that there's a full legitimacy to the fact that, it's better to not cook the foods. I think cooking releases nutrients. And we go to the next slide. I just wanted to real quick, I have the references on these, but these are some other studies that have been done and case studies in some instances that have found some of the issues that can crop up with raw diet. They don't mention the big one that I see, and that's on the next slide. What I see is in raw diets is we've had several people that actually developed diverticulitis or diverticulosis and intestinal pain, incredible intestinal pain after being on raw diets for some time. So it was the exact opposite of what it was supposed to be, and it didn't surprise me because cooking foods, interestingly, when we used to have people with diverticulitis and diverticulosis in the hospital, when I worked in the hospital, a lot of these people could not tolerate things like salad and raw vegetables. So we would have them cook their vegetables, and they tolerated them just fine. So and you still get a good bit of the nutrition out of them, and you don't have to cook them to death. So anyway, that's just what we see, is that it doesn't always work out to on this digestive issue. And it just makes sense to me because it just comes down to human capacity for digestion of plant foods is not like it is in a lot of other species. So that's just the way it is. I have no problem with people trying a raw diet, but it's basically, there's got to be a lot of caution in it. And, basically I kind of look at this, any diet in the same kind of light. If people are just hell-bent on trying something, it'll either work for them or it won't. And if it doesn't work, they'll still hopefully take away a few food ideas and things that they liked on that diet that they'll carry with them forever. So that's kind of the way I look at it. Real quickly, I want to mention Mediterranean diet. This is another highly now medically accepted diet, highly touted diet, good bit of study on it showing reduced health risks. I just want to bring up that there are tons of different versions of Mediterranean diets, but the general things are to try to switch over to lower glycemic sources of carbs. So whole fruits and vegetables, whole grains, and avoid the refined sugars and grains, and reduce red meat, switch over, eat more fish, try to eat fish at least once or twice a week. And most Mediterranean diets include low-fat poultry, chicken and turkey, low-fat dairy. I don't know how they'd get that turned over to low-fat, because on the Isle of Crete in the 1940s there wouldn't have been any such thing. But anyway, that's just me thinking that. And red meat only occasionally, eat nuts and beans, moderate on alcohol. And if you look into all the other recommendations, one of the big things is portion control. So this is just one of the studies that showed a 23% reduced risk of death from any cause when you ate according to this meal pattern. The other thing is they throw in on this one, they have active lifestyles. Why? Because they walk everywhere. So it's not just the diet itself, it was the walking. So Mediterranean diet in general is a decent, healthy diet, but I want to just put a big caution out there, this emphasis on whole grains. And I just came across another person just the other day, it's a physical therapist that we've been going to, who was asking me about what we do, and And, you know, so in the course of the conversation, I mentioned, I said, you know, people bring up, they think, oh, whole grains, I should be eating more whole grains. This is a big feature of the Mediterranean diet. And the problem is they gain weight. And wouldn't you know, he said, exactly. He said, that is exactly what happened to me. I started trying to make sure I was including whole grains, and I blew up. And through the course of just being in a health-related field, he changed his diet to a low-carb approach, did more of a paleo type thing, and started getting the weight off and lost a good bit, but he's going to come in for a consult so he can figure out what he can do to help himself a little more. So it was just interesting, and once again, an example. But so I just want to say on Mediterranean diet, basically, when would you want to use this diet? I mean, if people, I think of using the Mediterranean diet when I have a person who comes in my door that still is eating an awful lot of bad food, you know, drinking soft drinks, not eating enough fruits and vegetables, and they really haven't made much progress in the overall quality of their diet yet. A Mediterranean diet can be a good way to transition them over to healthier eating. So that's one of the times that I think of using a Mediterranean diet. Okay, paleo. On the low carb category, one of the diets that I really wanted to make sure I get in about paleo diets and ketogenic diets. On paleo diet, it really is a low-carb diet. It still includes animal protein, but it's a perfect example of a diet that is healthy, you know, encourages healthy animal proteins, but a lot of plant food. So it actually, depending on how it's done, it can be a healthy plant-based diet, but you eat a lot of plant foods and you also eat some animal proteins. What is not supposed to be eaten on a paleo diet is beans, no grains, no potatoes. Dairy products are completely eliminated, and then get rid of all the processed refined sugars, flours, and most versions will, if you read the fine print, will say to limit oils, although I do know a lot of paleo diet followers that use a lot of coconut oil. You know, is there an inherent problem with cereal grains and beans? And the theories are that when we eat cereal grains, it induces leptin resistance, and their theory is that our evolution hasn't allowed us to tolerate the cereal grains for that reason. I really don't see grains in particular being any more of a problem than other starches, typically. But sometimes you do have some people that it seems with grains in particular, they really bloat up. And to me, that's not a leptin resistance issue, that's a digestion issue. There are some theories out there also, because grains are high lectin foods, grains and beans in particular, that they may bind to insulin receptors, you know, and other tissues throughout the body that they create a problem. I'm not going to say that this isn't the case. I think it can happen, but the problem is that if that's going on, the underlying issue is gut permeability issues, and once you address that, you can resolve a lot of the issues. So I don't think it's the food itself. I think it's the condition of the condition of the person that's eating it. If we go to the next slide, you will see that there was a study done using Paleo Diet and type 2 diabetics. It was only 13 patients, and but they had great results with decreased hemoglobin A1C, triglycerides, blood pressure, weight, and BMI. So they are effective, and it's because they're solidly in the lower carb category. This is another study that looked at, interesting because it compared paleo and Mediterranean diet, and it found that the paleo group, and these were people with glucose intolerance and or diabetes, and they had 26% drop in glucose on the paleo group and only 7% decrease in the Mediterranean. Well, Mediterranean's higher carb. Typically a Mediterranean diet will run about 40, usually not lower than 45% of the calories coming from carb. So about 50%. And they did note that the changes were independent of the drops in waist circumference. But if you look at the bottom line down there, the paleo group lost 3.7 kilograms and the Mediterranean diet group lost 2.5. So they lost a little, just not nearly as much. The big caution that I want to tell you is, you know, we incorporated Paleolithic diets when, you know, quite a few years ago, and really thought that this was going to be an answer. And what has come out over time is that the lack of resistant starch, and it took us just until the last 5 years to realize what was going on. But now with research coming out on how important starches that are resistant to digestion are for our overall health. So when you eat a whole grain, you know, you eat a grain that has this husk, or you eat a bean and you've got that skin. And that skin being on the bean just literally protects some of that starch from digesting, whether it's a bean, whether it's a whole grain, whether it's a nut or seed of some type. And therefore, those, you know, and some starches, like certain type of starch in corn, just are naturally resistant to digestion, even when you don't have the hull on the corn. And this starch goes to the large intestine and feeds your gut flora. And let's see if we can go on to, well, I have the slide later on, slides later on about resistant starch, but going back to paleo diets, the problem is if we're very strict on the resistant starch and people aren't getting other sources like artichokes, or I think artichokes are one of the few like vegetable sources of resistant starch, their gut integrity can really become compromised over time. And so what you will tend to see is that this is the category of person that when they go back on carbohydrates, they really have a rebound effect and really have a dramatic weight rebound and weight gain. And part of the issue is the loss of the GLP-1 from the gut, which helps regulate blood sugar, and therefore people can't tolerate the higher carbohydrate foods as well anymore. So it's really a side effect of Paleolithic diets too. So that's why with our metabolic code diet, it's close to a paleo diet, but we've kept beans in as a source of resistant starch. And eventually we work to try to have people reintroduce some starches, maybe eat some high resistant starch oatmeal, things like that now and then, to help support gut flora populations and the important, production of different hormones in the gut. So that's the caution on paleo. Overall, I like the diets, but you really do have to be careful to protect gut integrity. Okay, in Jim's last seminar, some questions came up about ketogenic diets, so I really wanted to make sure that we covered this. And we have a ketogenic diet in the Lifestyle Guidance Portal available for use. It was labeled Ketogenic Diet. We recently changed the title of it because it actually is not a true ketogenic, which is a medical diet that is very high in fat, no more than 20% protein, and under 10% carb. This is a medical diet that originated, it was found out to be useful for people with seizure disorders, epilepsy and seizure problems. And the way you do the diet is you figure out the calorie needs of the person, and you, within that calorie need, you make the ratio come out to either 3:1 fat to protein plus carb, or 4:1, and typically the 4:1 ratio, which is a little stricter, so it might be down more, actually only around 15% protein and 6% carb or something like that. But you're trying to keep intake of glucose very, very low. And in fact, you even, on a true medical ketogenic diet, you don't want too much protein because there's I think it is four amino acids that are glucogenic and will convert to glucose. And you're trying to keep glucose very, very low, and that helps keep seizure activity under control. It has an effect on the brain cells that it limits the seizures. So you take the calorie need for the person based on their height and weight, their age. If they're children, you have to figure out the proper calorie for the age, and of course male or female. So I just wanted to show you, I had a client that I did a ketogenic diet for a couple years ago, and it was a small, short woman, so 1,200 calories covered it on calorie needs. On that calorie level, there were 18 added fat servings, so it's a very high fat diet. This was in addition to the fats that she would be getting in her nuts and seed servings and the fats in her animal proteins themselves. We could only do about 8 ounces of protein using this 70-20-10 as a kind of a guide. And the issue with ketogenic diets, if you do them true, is you can't even eat too many of your fruits and vegetables because you'll start to get too much carb and you'll come out of ketosis. And you really, with a true ketogenic diet, you want to try to maintain ketosis all the time. So this was a sample menu that I worked up for her. We did sometimes she wanted to do protein shakes for in the morning. And being that this was an adult, and this was an adult using the diet for cancer, not for seizures. So we were able to add fiber, and these spectra reds, greens, and purples, they're using plant pigments for health. They were Da Vinci products. Since you can't eat a lot of fruits and vegetables, we were trying to get the phytonutrients from plants in another way, and so that's how we did it. And then you can see what the meal pattern looks like. Very low amount of protein at lunch. She was able to have a good 2 cups of salad, and then same thing for dinner, only 3 ounces. So I'm pointing this out because here's the deal with ketogenic diets. If you have somebody that needs it for seizure, they really have to be calculated out to this level. And this was a person that was trying to do this very seriously for cancer, so also should really calculate it out. Because, for cancer, they're trying to starve those tumors of glucose, and there's some substantiation to the use of ketogenic diets for cancer. But then there's this other whole category of people who are now using ketogenic diets for weight loss. And this next slide just shows that here's another category of diet you'll see called ketogenic. These are very low-carb diets, Atkins-type low-carb diets. They can induce some ketosis. Because they're higher in protein, they will not keep you in a constant state of ketosis. So if you really need that constant ketotic state, those versions typically aren't appropriate, although there are some studies that find that they're fairly effective for management of epilepsy. What I've seen, and even in kids, but what I've seen on that, and you'll find it on blogs and websites and things, they'll help, but they won't control it as well as a true ketogenic diet. Okay, so what are the issues that come up with ketogenic? If you're doing an Atkins type, and especially when you're doing the medical ketogenic, you cannot get in enough fruits and vegetables. That's the biggest problem we have with ketogenic diets. It's not that they're low carb, but if you're doing the Atkins type, you can eat more protein, and that's a good thing when you're doing this for weight management. But you just can't eat enough fruits and vegetables to get in all the nutrients you need. So what we see on ketogenic diets as side effects is we see if they're doing them truly real high fat, you'll see constipation sometimes as a problem. So you're going to need to supplement with fiber typically. And, just fiber alone won't do it always. You got to make sure they have good magnesium intake, magnesium supplement like magnesium glycinate, that they're on probiotics, and that they're drinking plenty of water. Because of the fact that they can't do enough plant foods, you really want to make